Show you what I mean by this. The Old Testament, of course in Christianity, it's all kind of relative. In Christianity, the book of Genesis is in the Old Testament, and then of course there's the New Testament after the birth of Christ. So in the Old Testament, let's say we were going to take a look at, it was written of course in Hebrew, New Testament was written in Greek, and the interesting thing about both of those languages is that each letter in those alphabets can be converted into a numerical value. So let's say that we're talking about the heart. What is the Hebrew word for heart? It's lev. Okay, doesn't seem like much so far. But if we convert lev over to a number, we come up with the number 32. Okay, what do we know about the number 32? Well, first, it's a number that's known for balance and harmony and peace, like you might expect. Nothing unusual there. But if we look at the King James Bible, and the reason I'm going to use this version is because many people consider it to be mathematically pure and the inspired word of God. So if we were to look at it this way, right? So let's say if there really is a God and creator, then you would expect that God would be the best mathematician, physicist, biochemist that ever existed, and God would leave a signature someplace. So when we look at the Bible, if it really is the inspired word of God, then there should be a mathematical code there, a fingerprint that God left behind. So what's interesting is that the word heart in Hebrew, of course, appeared 765 times. Now, I like to play around with math and look for patterns. So when you're going to invent something and you want to create something new, you make observations about systems, especially living systems, and then you see, are there any type of patterns that we can follow? And the interesting thing is that if you take that 765 and you add each number individually, and you keep doing that until we get a number between 0 and 9, 9 means fulfillment. Okay, interesting. What else can we say? Okay, now let's just use the first 5 books of the Old Testament. So what I thought was, okay, let's take the number of times the word heart appears in the Old Testament. So you can see here in book of Genesis, 11 times, Exodus 37 times, and so forth. It appears exactly 100 times. Now, if you take the number of times it appears and then divide it by 32, the numerical value of heart, then you get those numbers in that last column, and then you add them up, and you get 3.125. Okay, let's do the same thing now, and what we'll do is we'll take the number of times that it appears instead of individually, but in passages, then it's 92 times, and if you add them up, it's 2.875. Doesn't seem like anything yet. However, if we take the number of times the word appears, add the number of passages, it equals 6. To get the average is 3. And then in the Bible, the number 3 represents God's presence in something. So we start to see something here, that the word heart can be distilled through a series of mathematical calculations down to a number which represents God's involvement. So anytime you see the number 3 in the Bible, it always means God is involved in something. Okay, maybe you're not convinced yet. Let's take the number of times that it appears in the passages, 100 plus 92, 192, 1 plus 9 plus 2 equals 12, 1 plus 2 equals 3. God's involvement again. Let's take the number of times the word appears plus the number of passages. 192 divided by 2 is 96. 96 equals 32, which is the number for the heart, multiplied by 3, which is God's involvement. There are 426 verses in the Bible with the word 3. 4 plus 2 plus 6 equals 12. 1 + 2 = 3. God's involvement. You getting the point? Okay. I'm going to tell you why this matters, is because when you come back next year, you're going to see how we use these formulas and equations to create new technology that reverses human aging. Okay, that's a spoiler. Okay, so what's an example of how we can apply this? Well, actually, I have a patent. There's a whole series of patents on pulsed electromagnetic field therapy. And one of the things that we did was we took an electronic stethoscope and we put it over the 4 chambers of the heart. And then we took that signal and we put it through a signal generator, we put it through an amplifier, and we fed that back through this coil. So this electromagnetic field that was external to the body was beating with the human heart. It's a little bit complicated, so what that means is it's not something you'd really have in your home and you could use it that way. But what we were doing with this was regenerating nerve damage, peripheral nerve damage. And we found it to be very, very effective. So there's actually ways that we can take this math and apply it in the real world to heal. All right, now let's talk about the enemy. Let's talk about heart disease. And of course, what we want to do is understand first what is the problem that we're trying to tackle here. So we know that atherosclerosis is going to be a thickening of the arterial walls, stiffening of the arteries over time, accumulation of plaque, reduced blood flow. And this is something which is not inevitable, but if you're dealing with this problem now, we want to, or if you're interested in preventing it, then the question is, what is it that we need to do, and how did you get into that circumstance in the first place? And unfortunately, let's see if this is not working, unfortunately. Or is it? Oh, there we go. With current medical treatments, so you go see your medical doctor. Doctor says, well, you have clogged arteries, essentially. And so you're a candidate for bypass surgery. We have to put you on drugs. Maybe you're going to get put on statins, which have undesirable side effects. And it's unlikely, because I'm not knocking medical doctors. Most don't get the training that they need to look at putting one of their patients on an exercise program, on diet and nutrition, the value of supplements. They just simply most don't get trained in those disciplines. So they're going to recommend what they are taught in medical school, which is going to be surgery and drugs. So this, of course, is what this looks like if you essentially look at a pipe, and then the inner diameter of that pipe gets smaller and smaller over time. There's going to be reduced blood flow, and then ultimately, of course, blood flow is blocked entirely, and this is something we absolutely have to avoid, because that could result in a heart attack or a stroke. So, of course, there's current treatments for heart disease, as we already talked about, and these things are fine if someone needs surgery. If it's life-threatening, then maybe there's not time to reverse the condition. But the whole idea behind this is we don't want to get to that point in the first place. So, of course, the problem with this approach is that someone goes to see their doctor and it's already too late. The medical doctor is not thinking about necessarily prevention. Not most of them. You have medical doctors, of course, that are clinical nutritionists, they're acupuncturists as well, and they're going to be looking at these therapies. So I'm definitely not knocking medical doctors. This is more a commentary on the system of indoctrination in medical school, of what is lacking. So again, we can use an analogy behind this. It's like, do you want to go to see a mechanic and get an oil change, get new tires, get these things taken care of as preventatives, or do you want to wait until your engine seizes and you've run out of oil, or your tires go bald, before you start to correct it. Okay, the choice is pretty obvious, is that we want to do the preventative maintenance on the human body so we don't end up in this situation. So, a little bit of a disclaimer first. I am not a medical doctor. I'm not giving medical advice. We don't claim that our products treat, cure, or mitigate any disease in human beings or animals. And these recommendations are for you to simply say, wow, this is very, very interesting research. I need to take this research to my healthcare practitioner so they can recommend what will work for me in my situation. Is that fair? Come on. Is that fair? All right. Fantastic. Great. Okay. So let's look at some of the causes first of heart disease. Most of these are going to be pretty self-evident. We're going to start with lack of exercise. And a good reason to start with this is that the clinical data is overwhelmingly positive that exercise is better than any type of pharmaceutical drug when it comes to preventing and reversing heart disease, bar none. So any strategy that is going to include preventing or reversing heart disease by default has to include some type of exercise. It can be if you have some weight to lose, it can be just something as simple as walking, getting the body moving, starting off slow and working up, and then preferably doing combination of resistance training and cardio. Lack of proper nutrition is obvious. If you saw that movie Super Size Me, where the guy was eating McDonald's 3 times a day, after like 2 weeks, he was practically dead. Right? So we have to be thinking about our nutrition. What are we putting in our bodies? That's absolutely critical. The natural aging process. Our body is going to be a little bit more prone to detrimental effects from aging. And so this is why techniques to reverse the human aging process are so very necessary, because we can use it as a way to mitigate serious disease. Genetics, of course, plays a role. Medications make people more likely to get heart disease or ironically die as a result of taking the medication. And then, of course, physical and emotional stress. Okay. Here's an interesting study on exercise. We won't go through the whole thing now in the interest of time. But basically what this says is that if you're exercising, either doing low intensity or high intensity, you're going to be significantly reducing your risk of cardiovascular disease. And again, no surprise there. VO2 max. So VO2 max refers to the ability of our muscles to use oxygen. How effectively do we take oxygen that's in the blood and then turn it over into usable work? The better the VO2 max, the healthier the cardiovascular system, right? And that inherently is going to make sense. But what's also really important here as a concept is that if you were to take the population and you were look at a scale of people that were terribly out of shape, that were in a disease state, and then people that were Olympic athletes, what happens is that if you move people from the very low end, even up into the middle range, you are significantly reducing that person's risk of having a heart attack or stroke. So what this means is that when we're thinking about mindset on this, what type of goals do you have to set in terms of exercise? You don't have to think in terms of, I've got to exercise like a professional athlete or an Olympic athlete in order to be completely healthy. No, that's not it at all. What it means is that if you're getting yourself into a reasonable degree of shape, each step that you take in the right direction is going to continue to reverse your odds of getting a serious event like a heart attack or stroke. So these things are obviously really important. Okay, think we've kind of covered this a little bit, but I want you to take a look at the very last sentence there. The summary hazard ratio for mortality, comparing the slowest with the fastest quarter of walking speed, was 2.87. So this is a remarkable reduction in risk of heart disease. Okay, so the bottom line here is anytime you're going to make a serious change in your diet, in your exercise, you want to be guided by your healthcare practitioner because they're going to know what's best for your specific situation, especially if you have a pre-existing condition. So if you don't have training in this, definitely work with a trained healthcare practitioner. Okay. So let's take one more look at this so we know what we're dealing with, but this is a pretty good picture of what happens over time. So for people that are young and healthy, arterial wall looks normal, there's no accumulation of plaque, and then over time, this plaque will accumulate. There's a whole variety of reasons, by the way, for why this happens, but suffice it to say that it does. So there's early warning signs. That's a good thing. Now, guys, I have bad news for you and kind of good news. The good news is that if you have erectile dysfunction, it's an early warning sign of heart disease, so you can go ahead and do something. The bad news is, I'm sorry to hear you have erectile dysfunction. But that's something, it's a little bit, we refer to it as the canary in the coal mine. That is about 60% of the time, it is going to be a symptom of cardiovascular disease. So another percentage of time, let's say it's psychological, but the majority of the time, it's an early sign that there's heart disease. Of course, poor circulation. If you're having problem with your extremities, they're getting cold, that's going to be an indication that the cardiovascular system isn't doing what it's supposed to. High blood pressure, of course, is fairly obvious, chest pain, and so forth. So, and by default, as the amount of weight that you have around your waist increases, further risk of heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. So the good news is that there's warning signs here, and we don't have to really guess as to whether or not we're prone. The other way to look at this, too, is that as we get over the age of 30, 35, we should be proactively engaged in proper exercise, diet, nutritional supplements, patches, to reduce our risk of having a heart attack or stroke as much as possible. Okay, so then how would we characterize some of these things? And the reason why this is important is that if we can, like when I'm looking to invent something, I want to create a detailed map of the problem to define the problem. Because if you can't articulate, if you can't define the problem, then how are you going to come up with a solution? So in things like age reversal, you want to understand what is really going inside the cell. We can look at mitochondrial function. We can look at the potential, the electrical potential around the cell. There's epigenetic changes that occur, so changes in gene expression. The ability of the cell to detoxify. We look at the phase angle around the cell membrane. These and other measures are an important way to define the aging process. So as we define the aging process, then we can look at each one and say, okay, how exactly could I go about enhancing mitochondrial function? And then if we do that, what effect is that going to have on gene expression over time? And ultimately, is that going to result in lengthening telomeres? Is it going to result in beneficial changes in gene expression? And then so ultimately, do we see reversal of the age of the cell? And this is actually a relatively long process. We were doing a study, I don't know if I should say this. What the heck. We were doing a study on to see if any of our patches would lengthen telomeres. And what we found is that if we looked at 3 months post using this patch, you couldn't see any change in the telomeres. But at 6 months, you began to see those changes. In age reversal, you have to go about 6 to 9 months of using a product before we actually start to see beneficial changes in gene expression. So some of these changes are going to show up in a relatively short period of time. There are effects which we can measure in the metabolism of the cell by doing blood and urine testing that will show up within minutes, bioelectrical tests that show up within less than 1 minute, but then other things are going to be much, much longer, 6-9 months. So it's important that we look at these things from the point of view of you start on an exercise program, you start taking supplements, you start using patches. There's going to be effects that you're going to see immediately, like reduction in pain, improvement in range of motion. There's going to be other effects that will show up over a period of a few weeks, such as 3 to 6 weeks, improvements in cognition. And then there's other effects yet that are going to show up over a period of many months. So it's important to be very, very consistent with these programs. Don't start a program and then a week or two later stop because you didn't think something worked the way that you wanted it to. This is about, a lifetime commitment to health and wellness. Okay, so how could we go about then reversing heart disease? Let's get right to it. And we want to do this, of course, as natural a means as possible and hopefully avoid surgery and avoid medications. Okay, so we're going to skip through this one very quickly with exercise, but needless to say, there is a direct correlation between human aging and strength and stamina. The correlation is extremely clear that if you want to have a long health span and stay healthy and strong for as long a period of time, you must exercise. There's no other way to go about it, because if you're in your 70s and you're not exercising and you've had significant sarcopenia, reduction in muscle mass, that's also going to translate into a reduction in bone density. And then, of course, the first time you fall, you may have an accident that you may or may not recover from, and that recovery is going to take a long period of time. You may see something next year that will solve that problem. I think that's a fair tease. Okay. So, talk to your doctor about starting slow. Get into a program that is going to work for your lifestyle. Don't try to, become an Olympic athlete your first week. All right, start off slow and then make progression. It can be something as simple as walking 20 or 30 minutes a couple of times a week. If you want to get a little bit more aggressive, then start doing Tabatas, which are phenomenal. And definitely get into resistance training. Again, it doesn't have to be anything complicated. It can be body weight exercises to start, and then hopefully you're going to be weight training. By the way, a very interesting study that was done in Russia on lifting very, very heavy weights in a static hold. It found that when you're going to do an exercise like a static squat or a static bench press with heavy weight, the pressure from the weight put on the bone causes stem cells in the bones to come out into the blood and the lymphatic system. So this exercise, as it turns out, especially heavy resistance training, is a way to increase the number of circulating stem cells in the body. Okay. Now, LifeWave patches, this combination of X39 and X49 was talked about a little bit before, and you can find this study in our back office, so we're just going to skip through it quickly now. But basically, when you're embarking on an exercise program, you want to make sure that you're getting adequate protein in your diet several times per day. Especially you need to be acutely activating mTOR. So mTOR is what's turning on muscle protein synthesis, and so you want to have about depending on your age, about 3 to 4 grams of the amino acid leucine in that protein serving. So if you're a vegan or a vegetarian, your protein source is going to be lower in leucine. If you're consuming things like whey protein, red meat, you're going to have a higher amount of leucine. But you could be consuming 20 or 30 grams of protein, and if you don't have enough leucine, you're not turning on muscle protein synthesis, and you're not going to be building new muscle, even if you're exercising and you think you're eating right. But when you use a tool like the patches, it's going to dramatically increase the rate at which you're going to improve your strength and stamina. Okay, and here's some other figures here of X49 only versus the combination of the two. And there's a really nice study about this in our back office. Okay. And the really nice thing about this is that X39 and X49 complement one another. X39, I used to be able to say this. I'm not technically supposed to say this anymore. So I think what I can say is that X39 works on the entire body and X49 is more selective, right? But the bottom line is that it'll make you leaner and stronger. Okay, and this is an example of a 74-year-old on the before and after. Okay, let's keep things moving here. And let's talk about nutrition, hardening or stiffening of the arteries. Okay, vitamin D. There was an age reversal study that I saw recently that involved 5 different substances. One was zinc, the other was vitamin D. Another one was growth hormone. Another compound that was used was metformin. But in any case, the reason I bring this up is that it was shown that through the combination of these materials over a period of 9 months, the average reduction in human age was 6.5 years. So vitamin D should not be underestimated. 50,000 IUs of vitamin D daily, which is only to be used for a short period of time, and if you have a problem with your kidneys, you shouldn't take this much. And you should always do this under the advice of your healthcare practitioner. But vitamin D at 50,000 IUs per day has been used successfully for treating cancer. 50,000 IUs of vitamin D daily has been used successfully to push viruses out of the body. And that information would be helpful for people to know, but unfortunately, some of the powers that be want to suppress freedom of speech and not let you know that. But of course, 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 IUs of vitamin D daily is safe for most people, and unequivocally, this is shown to improve the elasticity of the arteries. Okay, what about accumulation of plaque? This is a big one. If you go see your medical doctor and they've had conventional training, one of the things they're going to say is that there's nothing you can do to remove arterial plaque, and that is just absolutely false. Very simple materials have been demonstrated in clinical studies, and there's a whole list of studies there that you can reference, have been successful at removing arterial plaque over a period of time. Generally, in these studies, you see that they last about 6 to 9 months. But even simple substances like an extract of garlic, pomegranate extract, the enzyme in pomegranates, has been shown to digest arterial plaque and improve blood flow. Especially pomegranate extract is so interesting because a study that was done, which was posted by Life Extension, had shown that individuals that took a pomegranate extract over a period of 9 months were able to avoid bypass surgery. So these are the type of things that we're interested in. Vitamin K, MK7, and MK4 are other materials that are known to remove arterial plaque. So this notion that we age and there's nothing that we can do to improve the health of our heart is just absolute nonsense. Okay. Oh, one other thing I wanted to bring up was omega-3s. So, of course, often when we think of omega-3s and their value, what we're thinking about is that we take the omega-3 orally and it will prevent plaque from sticking to the arterial walls. Well, here was an interesting study just recently that was showing that injections of omega-3s could prevent heart disease entirely. The author of that study, by the way, insinuated that this could reverse heart disease, but they didn't want to go that far. But there was data in the study to actually show that. All right, how about reduced blood flow? This is an important one because if you're someone sitting here today and you have you've neglected your body for a long period of time and you already have this problem, what you're going to be thinking about is something like, okay, I have high blood pressure through restricted blood flow as a result of having accumulation of arterial plaque. My doctor has told me if I don't change, I'm going to be a candidate for bypass surgery. So what do I do? Okay, so let's take a look at this. Nitric oxide, okay? There's any number of different ways of elevating nitric oxide. There's a whole host of things. Many studies have actually shown that beets are one of the best ways, compared to supplementation, of naturally elevating nitric oxide. Pycnogenol, which is a pine bark extract, is another good way to do it. And for kind of like a 1-2 punch here, the combination of garlic and vitamin C has been shown to increase nitric oxide levels by about 300% over baseline. So you get the benefit of reducing the arterial plaque and improving blood flow all in the same combination of using those two. There's another one that's really good, which is black ginger extract. That's something from Thailand. It's relatively uncommon, but you can get it. And that does a great job of improving nitric oxide and blood flow. And these are things that go to work immediately, by the way. They'll also, not surprisingly, many of those things, because they're elevating nitric oxide, people will see almost an immediate reduction in their blood pressure. So this brings up another question. If there is an accumulation of arterial plaque, then there's going to be damage to the endothelial lining. What do we do about that? I wanted to mention this one enzyme specifically, which is nattokinase. Now, nattokinase is it's a natural enzyme, and it's found in fermented soy. And very quickly, this was discovered in Japan. And what was found was that people that were consuming natto had a much lower risk of heart disease than a control population. And so it was quickly found that nattokinase was the active compound. Well, sure enough, if you take nattokinase, it will improve blood flow, it will prevent and reverse heart disease. But nattokinase more recently has been shown to digest viruses like those that are related to COVID. Oh, I guess I can't say that. Okay. It rhymes with a virus that rhymes with Schmovid. All right. So that's an important one. So one of the things, as an example, that you could include in your daily regimen, which would be for everyone, no matter how good a shape you're in, is nattokinase. And the reason for that is that it will help to reduce your risk of heart attack, reduce your risk of stroke, improve blood flow, reduce your risk of neuropathy, and eventually we're all going to get COVID again because this is going to be around forever now. But the good thing is that we can adopt strategies that prevent us from showing any symptoms, right? You guys do know that they're putting the mRNA vaccine in food now, right? And in animals and that kind of stuff. Yeah, so we need to be thinking about these things, that when they're not telling us they're in food, and it's going to get into our bodies, what can we do to destroy the spike protein? So fortunately, God and nature have already provided solutions for us. We just need to go out and use them. Okay, so let's look at inflammatory stress. Another thing that, of course, works very, very well for COVID is NAC, and it actually works so well that here in the United States, the FDA tried to take it off the market, and it's relatively speaking, a natural compound. But not surprisingly, anything that is going to reduce inflammatory stress in the body, which would be antioxidants, coenzyme Q10, NAC, vitamin C, for serious cases of heart disease, 10 grams up to 70 grams IV of vitamin C is used. And then something that's very, very successful